Good afternoon. My name is Mabel Castleberry, and today I am presenting a professional development on how to create a more inclusive school environment for students with special needs. I have been in education for the past 10 years, and after many conversations with fellow teachers, all of them in general education, I began to realize that they don't feel very comfortable interacting or teaching students of special needs. And it's not because they're scared or they're judging them or anything like that. They just don't feel adequately trained. They just don't feel like they have the knowledge to give those students what they need. That is why I chose to do this presentation. So just a couple of things before we get started, I'd like to point out that I have provided handouts, one of them being the actual PowerPoint presentation with space to take notes as we go through the show. The second handout is an article that we are going to talk about a little bit later in one of the slides, and it is an article that gives 10 tips for creating and 10 tips and 10 reasons for creating a more inclusive environment for students with special needs in the school community. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and let's get started. As a person who has been a special education teacher for over 10 years, I go through the same daily experiences as most general educators. However, I see things from a completely different perspective. For example, if a student takes an unusually long time to return from the restroom, most teachers would assume he or she is playing or getting into some type of trouble. Whereas in my head, I have a million questions. Is the student having a meltdown or a seizure or some other medical emergency? Are they struggling with their clothing due to fine motor weaknesses? Or are they afraid to flush the toilet due to sensory issues? Now, I don't want anyone to think that I am saying general educators are insensitive in any way. I'm merely giving this example to show how general education teachers are not being properly trained on how to be mindful of and meet the needs of all students, whether they interact with them daily or not. I mean, think about it. How often have we heard parents describe situations where a teacher yelled at or constantly corrected a student for not sitting properly or for making inappropriate noises during a lesson, only to find out later from that parent that the student has a diagnosis of ADHD or autism? Despite what those parents may think, a situation like this does not happen just because the teacher is picking on that student. It could simply be because they aren't aware of the student's disability or they don't know how to meet that child's specific needs in the classroom. This is the reason I chose to create and present this professional development. Now, to give you a better idea of my reasoning behind this creating this presentation, I'm going to show you a quick video developed by the National Center for Learning Disabilities.
My advice to other schools who want to create a culture of inclusivity and a culture of collaboration, a culture that focuses on character development as much as it focuses on academics, is to be intentional and be patient, and to surround yourselves with the right people. The hiring and training and recruitment and retention process is all critical to get the right people in the right places who want to be there for kids, who want to put in the extra effort that it would take, and to set up structures and processes that will make it sustainable. So when the head of school leaves, the program is free. I do believe there remains stigma about students with disabilities, and not just an outside perspective of those students, but internal to schools. And I think internal to schools is the greater challenge. That is for that student to begin to integrate into a community after high school or into higher education or any other changes in their life. It is very challenging for students who feel that they are less successful than their peers.
Part of the process in creating this presentation was for me to survey 20 general educators in the Baton Rouge area. On this slide, you see the results of that survey. It was conducted a few weeks ago for me to get an idea of what concerns general educators had when interacting with students with special needs. My findings were that 100% of those teachers felt students with special needs are more fragile than those without special needs, so they needed to be treated differently. Now, they weren't just talking about those that have medical concerns. They just felt that if they noticed a student was a little bit different, that they just really didn't know how to approach them or how to interact with them. 85% of these teachers have never seen or read an individualized education plan, otherwise known as an IEP. 60% of these teachers were unable to explain the difference between accommodations and modifications for students. Now, if a teacher can't tell you the difference between the two, how do they know if they are properly providing those things for those students inside the classroom? 75% of those teachers did not feel knowledgeable enough to meet the needs of special education students or 504 students in their classes. And then 60% of those general education teachers stated that they do not feel comfortable teaching or even interacting with students with special needs. Not because they are afraid, but simply because they don't feel they have been given the background knowledge to know how to handle any situation that they may come across. Now I want to go over a few statistics just to give you an idea why I felt there is a need to create a more inclusive environment in the school community. Just to put these things into perspective, you're going to see on the slide that 1 in 5 children in the United States have learning issues that impede their ability to master basic reading, writing, and math skills. 14% of public school students in the United States received some type of special education services. And as you can see, these are statistics that were determined from results in the 2018-19 school year. Now, 64% of those students I just mentioned spend 80% of their instructional time in the regular education classroom. This is really concerning to me if they are in a classroom with teachers who are not prepared to provide the services that they need to provide for these students per their IEPs. And in 2017, it was reported that students with learning disabilities were 3 times more likely to drop out of school before graduating. So why does all this matter? As I said before, in one of your handouts, it is an article that was created by the TIES Center at the University of Minnesota. They came up with a list of reasons to promote school inclusivity. Like, why should we do this? Number one, the support of civil rights. Do your homework. Read up on federal laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, as well as any education laws that may be specific to your state. Number two, integration in community life. Find out what inclusive activities and events are available in your community outside of school. For example, most YMCA locations offer inclusive activities such as tennis, summer camps, and water-related activities. The Miracle League of Baton Rouge offers non-competitive baseball lessons and games for kids with disabilities at an adapted baseball complex. Volunteers are assigned as buddies, coaches, greeters, umpires, announcers, and even video board operators. Our local high school even hosts a special needs prom each year that is held during school hours. Students in different school organizations are paired up with students with special needs, and they attend prom together for a lot of fun, safe activities, and just being a typical teenager. Number three, a sense of belonging and acceptance. Are all students being treated with equal respect? When you see a student behaving differently from a typical student, how are you addressing them about that behavior? Are students with special needs allowed to play at recess and have lunch with students in the general population? Number four, varied learning opportunities. Are students with special needs being exposed to the same rigorous curriculum and ancillary activities as those in the general education population? Number five, use of best practices in instruction. This step can only be met if all teachers are properly trained on applying those best practices with students of all abilities. As teachers, we do our best to advocate for students, but sometimes that may require us to advocate for adequate training for ourselves. Number six, an individualized instruction in a supportive context. This again brings up the concept of adequate training. Take the time to become knowledgeable of laws for students with disabilities, how to read and interpret IEPs and 504 plans, and study different teaching methods such as the Universal Design for Learning. 7, relationships with peers. We're going to take this into two different sections. First of all, I want to look at this from a teacher perspective. Teachers, make a point to get to know special education teachers at your school. These teachers are often left out of the loop due to different schedules and increased workloads. Offer to help when you can, or even just be an ear to listen. For students, encourage inclusive play during recess. Diversify your classroom library. Assign peer tutors in the classroom. Start a buddy program at your school or create a special pen pal program with a special education class. Number 8, increased instructional support for all students. No two students are alike. Take the time to know them at the beginning of the school year. A great way to do this is by having families participate in an interest survey so you can learn about a student's life, not just about their academic needs. Another way to do this is by talking to teachers that have taught these students previously. But be careful with that one because teachers are not always as objective as they should be. Number 9, team building improves schools. This goes for both student team building and staff team building. It can include pep rallies, PBIS events, Teacher retreats are on-site teacher team building activities. At our school, we've developed a house system where students are divided into 4 houses. Each house is named by an encouraging word, such as tenacity or resilience. Students are separated into these groups in a mix of inclusive groups, students with special needs and students without, students with all abilities. They're purposely placed in houses with teachers that they have never met before or have had very little interaction with. For example, a lot of 3rd graders may be put in a group with a 4th grade teacher. This gives everyone a chance to build relationships with people they may not normally have access to. During this time, we don't really do academic activities. We do a lot of team building activities where students have to figure out each other's strengths in order to be successful in solving a problem. They have been a lot of fun. The students really enjoy it. We encourage them to wear a shirt that is the color of their team on the day where we have team meetings. So this is also an opportunity where they can wear free dress instead of having to wear their uniforms. And it gets them very excited about the day. They come into the rooms, there's lots of music playing. We just get them really energized and it's lots of fun. It steps away from the traditional learning. And again, it gives different students an opportunity to interact with students that they may normally have not interacted with. And the same goes for the teachers. Number 10, parental involvement. Have parents join the PTO. Teachers should join the PTO as well. Some schools have a parental advisory board. If parents seem reluctant to join these things, offer incentives. At my school, we offer free dress coupons for the students of parents who attend the quarterly PTO meetings. Also, we've had parent night out events for students with special needs where we have general education teachers or even general education students that volunteer their time to come hang out with these students, and we do many fun activities. And it gives parents of special needs students a little bit of a break so they can either have a date night or just get some things done that they don't normally get to take care of on a regular basis. Now, the next thing I want to do is do kind of a mini training of those things that I was talking about that teachers aren't necessarily made knowledgeable of when it comes to teaching all types of students. So these next couple of slides I'm going to call my back to basics section. Right here you see, you see a triangle, which is a 3-tiered system, and this is known as response to intervention or the RTI process. Now this may look different for different schools, but typically it is set up as a 3-tiered system. The first tier is an intervention that is set up inside of the general education classroom for students that need a little extra practice on the skill that they are studying at that time. This may include some small group activities or some one-on-one time with that teacher. If the student seems to not be mastering those skills with the intensive tier 1 intervention, they will move on to tier 2. Tier 2 requires an interventionist to usually pull out students and give them that extra time and extra practice on the materials that in the concepts they are not necessarily getting. Now, if they still continue to struggle, you move on to the tier 3 process, which is still with an interventionist, and it just gets more intensive where the student may even start practicing more basic skills that they may be lacking, such as phonics skills or studying multiplication facts. Once the student has shown not to be making progress in the tier 3 category, this is the time that the school will usually sit down with the parents and discuss the option of evaluating the student to see if they need a 504 plan, or they may have some type of learning disability or other disability that is impeding their learning. So they will be evaluated to see if an IEP plan needs to be developed. Now, most schools do provide some type of RTI training at the beginning of the school year for teachers. This is a great time to ask any questions you may have. Also make a point to introduce yourself to the school RTI coordinator or the school interventionists that are on campus. Oftentimes, these interventionists would love the opportunity to push into the classroom instead of pull the students out. However, they don't always feel that they are welcome in another teacher's classroom. The next step of the Back to Basics is knowing the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan. Now, you don't have to be an expert on it, but having some knowledge of these plans will help you in becoming a more diverse and well-rounded teacher. Make a point to build a relationship with the special education teachers and the 504 coordinator. This will make for a more pleasant work environment and help promote open-mindedness throughout the campus. This knowledge will also make you more marketable as a teacher. So just to give you a little rundown of the figure I have on this slide, an IEP is covered by the Education Law IDEA, and it applies to students who qualify for special education services in the core curriculum. There are strict procedures and timelines that need to be adhered to. Parents must participate in the building of an IEP and be met with yearly to discuss the progress being made. And students can receive federal funding or additional federal funding for students that have special education needs or receive special education services. Now, a 504 plan is a little bit different. It is covered in the act I mentioned before, the Rehabilitation Act, and it applies to students with qualifying disabilities. A lot of times you will see students with ADHD have a 504 plan. It is an informal process. Parents do not need to be included, although at my school, parents are included in 504 plan development as well as 504 plan discussions. Schools usually do not receive additional funding to address the needs of 504 students. Now, something that I found out on my survey that I was a little bit shocked to find is a lot of general education teachers do not understand the difference between providing accommodations and modifications for students based on their individual needs, both inside and outside of the classroom. You will see right here that the definition of an accommodation is to change how a student learns the material being presented to them. You will see in figure 2 that we have a student with headphones on in front of a computer. And a lot of times, a very common accommodation for struggling readers will be that the student is given the opportunity to have the text read aloud to them, either by the teacher or on an electronic device. And this is usually when they have struggles reading the words themselves, and it can impede their comprehension. Now, a modification is changing what a student is expected to learn. For example, if the students in the classroom are working on a narrative writing assignment and are asked to write a multi-paragraph essay on a narrative topic, a student that struggles with reading or writing or both may find it a little easier or may not be as stressed about the assignment if they are given the alternative opportunity to create a comic strip and put words into the bubbles to tell their story instead of having to write several paragraphs. Now, on this slide, I just wanted to go over a couple of things that you, as a teacher, should make a point to find out more information about your students at the beginning of the year when you receive your roster. Find out who has an IEP, who has a 504 plan, or which students are just receiving intervention, so you know that they're going to require a little additional support when they're in the classroom with you. It's also very important that if they have an IEP or a 504 plan, that you are knowledgeable of the modifications and accommodations that have been discussed with the parents and that should be provided in the classroom for them. Going over all of those specifics and things that you should be mindful of. What do you do with all of that? What happens now? Well, there are a couple of things. I have them separated into thinking about your teaching style and then thinking about your presence outside of the classroom, which a lot of times as teachers, we forget about that part. As far as our teaching style, think about it. Is your instruction differentiated? You may not always have students with special needs in your class or students that have 504 plans, but you may have students that struggle a little bit with different concepts. Think about your instruction and what you are teaching, and think about that every student learns differently. Does your teaching style tap into each of those different learning styles, or are you reaching every child in that classroom? Secondly, are you tougher on students that don't act like the model student? I know that is a hard subject to approach, but it does happen. Teachers sometimes tend to lose patience and get a little frustrated with students who aren't able to sit still in their chairs, who don't stay focused on assignments, or maybe fidget with tapping pencils or different things like that during instruction. Dig deeper. Find out if there's an underlying issue that are causing these things with this student, and find different ways to approach them and to keep them interested and invested in the lesson. Thirdly, are your expectations the same for every student no matter what? Well, they shouldn't be. No two students are alike. Whether they have a disability or not, every student learns differently. The expectations you set for one student should not be the same ones you have set for another. Some students need to be pushed a little harder because they pick up things really quickly. So to avoid them from getting bored, you need to find enrichment activities. Then others may have a difficult time understanding the math lesson that you're teaching, whereas they may pick up the reading assignment really quickly. So you know that you need to focus on that math skill with them a little bit more and a little bit more intensively. The second part of that is thinking about your presence outside of the classroom. And this is something that does not typically pop into teachers' heads. Are you open-minded when you see a student not adhering to rules in the halls or at recess? Do you automatically assume that they are trying to get into some type of trouble? Or is it that due to certain disabilities, they don't even realize that they are doing something that they shouldn't? Are you welcoming to all students? Are you standoffish to those that look or act a little bit differently? This again goes with being comfortable with all students and approaching and interacting with all students. Do you offer to help a struggling student even if they aren't yours? Lots of times I teach in a school that is 3rd and 4th grade. Lots of times I run into the issue of a student stoop down because they are trying to tie their shoe and they struggle with it. They don't really want to admit that they're struggling with it because they're embarrassed that they may not have the skill yet. Do you just walk on by or do you stop and help? Here's ways that you can create a more inclusive environment in your school community. I have it divided up into 2 sections by teacher involvement and then student involvement. For teacher involvement, one thing you can do is make sure that you are knowledgeable of all special education laws. Attend IEP and 504 meetings when needed, even if you don't really feel comfortable doing so. In fact, if you do feel uncomfortable with the situation, maybe talk to the person organizing the meeting beforehand and ask what kind of information you are expected to bring to the table in that meeting. Get to know your special education teachers at your school. Again, oftentimes, due to schedule conflicts, these teachers are left out of the loop of a lot of things going on in the school. Help them to be included and sometimes just maybe lend an ear as they discuss different things that are going on in their classroom. Then there's the student involvement part of it. You can create a buddy system between students in special education classes and students in the general education classes, such as the house activities that I talked about earlier, where students can be buddied up with students of different abilities so they can learn how to interact with each other and everyone feels included in some way, shape, or form. You can also create an anonymous pen pal program where students with special needs may write to students in the general education class and just ask different questions that they may want to ask, but so no one is judging that student on their abilities to write or in their reading skills or handwriting or anything like that. You can make it anonymous. Or you can go ahead and make the person known, and then those students can build relationships with each other between the classes. And then lastly, we want to always encourage inclusive play at recess, at PE, during different games going on in a classroom. You want to make sure everyone is included. It's a good time to do this if you're on duty at recess. Be observant. Be mindful not necessarily of just the students with special needs, but also those that just seem to be hanging out on their own a lot during recess. Approach them or approach other students who you know are outgoing and friendly, and encourage them to go and talk to that student and make them feel included. Now, my other suggestion is to expand your library. You're going to see in this figure I have, this is a listing of 12 different books that I found on the Measured Mom website. Some of the books that are featured in this include Thank You, Mr. Falker. And this book describes how a teacher discovers a student has a learning disability and takes the time to give that student the extra support that she needs so that she can be a strong reader in the classroom. Another book called My Sister Alicia May tells the story from the perspective of a girl who has a sister with Down syndrome. Don't Call Me Special helps children without special needs gain a better understanding of what life is like for those with special needs. It encourages students to not make assumptions about others before getting to know them. There are, of course, a lot of different options available, but I just wanted to touch on a few of them. Whenever you are purchasing books for your classroom, make sure that you have a diverse selection, so students can be exposed to all different topics and all different types of people. Now, I know that as teachers, when I'm suggesting this, the first thought that comes up to your mind is, oh, money, how am I supposed to add these kind of books to my classroom? Well, some options to do without breaking the bank is you can consult with your administration for funding options. You can talk to your school librarian about adding some of these titles to the school library when they place their book order. And then, of course, there's always grant writing, which is, to me, just money that's there for the taking. On this slide, you're just going to see some references along with the websites of the different articles and images that I included in my presentation. These, of course, are included on the PowerPoint handout. Feel free to check these out. It's lots of great resources that can help you become more educated on how to create that inclusive environment in your school. Again, my name is Mabel Castleberry, and I thank you so much for joining me in this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, but more importantly, I hope you learned something that you can take away into your classroom for this upcoming school year.